This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. This is not just a war over stolen land. Why do you think little boys are throwing stones at tanks? And we'll never really know how many people are dead. They drop bombs on innocent girls while they sleep in their bed. Israel is a terror state, they're terrorists that terrorize. I'll testify my television, televise, I'm telling lies. How many more resolutions have to be violated? How many more children have to be annihilated? This is not a war, it is systematic genocide. But whatever they try, Palestine will never die. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Hello, I'm Chris Williamson, and this is Palestine Declassified, where we investigate the Israeli regime's global war against solidarity with the illegally occupied people of Palestine. The past few weeks have seen widely reported protests in Iran that were apparently sparked by the death of a young Kurdish woman, allegedly at the hands of the police. But what's really going on in Iran? In today's programme, I'll be speaking to experts to cut through the aggressive propaganda and peer behind the corporate media's relentless hostile headlines to provide some objectivity. But first, we've got this special report by Latifa Abu Chakra on how the tragic death of a young woman sparked international protests.
Push the riot button. According to prevailing Western wisdom, Mahsa Amini was murdered in police custody after being savagely beaten in a police van. In reality, as quickly released CCTV footage showed, the young Kurdish woman collapsed after a conversation with a female police officer inside the police station. She was then attended to and taken directly to an ambulance. Photographs of her in hospital show no head injuries, and later medical staff released CT scans showing no recent injuries, though confirming that she had brain surgery some years previously. But the allegations that she was killed or murdered was the apparent spark used to whip up a frenzy of anti-government propaganda and reporting. Demonstrators have taken to the streets in many Iranian cities, and protests in support have erupted in the UK and elsewhere. But who pushed the riot button and why? The US immediately activated its assets and agents to foment subversion. This involved direct attacks on the police and other security services, with 11 killed in the first 10 days of protests, as well as extensive attacks on ambulances, which appear to have been directed externally. On the 1st of October, there was an armed terror attack on a police station in the city of Zehdan. There were 19 deaths, including 4 IRGC officers. 32 IRGC members were also wounded. Unsurprisingly, both the National Endowment for Democracy and the Open Society Foundation of George Soros advertise that they are active in relation to Iran. Both engage in attempting to foment regime change in Iran as they do elsewhere. Standing behind the US on this question is the Zionist regime. The official Twitter account of the regime openly states that it stands with the protesters and launched a cynical Remember Mahsa campaign, featuring Israeli settlers claiming that they stand in solidarity. Israel funds key US lobby groups pushing for more sanctions on Iran, including the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. United Against Nuclear Iran is stuffed with Zionists. Both groups are effectively assets of the so-called State of Israel. Meanwhile, Israel continues to directly support and utilize Kurdish separatist groups, which are currently engaged in subversion and terrorism against Iran. So, we see that both the US and Israel, via assets, agents, and proxies, come together to push the riot button in Iran.
As always, we're joined by our resident expert, David Miller. David's an academic and former professor at Bristol University and a leading British scholarly critic of Israel. He's also a co-founder and co-director of the lobbying watchdog initiative Spinwatch. Our guest expert today is Mona Issa. Mona is a journalist and editor for Mayadeen English, and is joining us from Lebanon. She's the author of Dirty Money, a revelatory article on how the largest colour revolution attempt in recent Iranian history is led by a woman on Washington's payroll. Welcome to the show. Mona, if I could start with you. Your article was one of the few that highlighted the absence of any evidence that Mahsa Amini was murdered. Tell us what you found out.
I'd like to start this out with how surprised I was with the accessibility of evidence that was present online, and how much big media has bombarded us with narratives with no factual basis whatsoever. In an interview by Masih Alinejad, basically a CIA asset that works for the U.S. government, an Iranian exile per se, she openly admits that she is leading the so-called revolution in Iran. So that's how I started out my investigation. Basically, what the article reveals is that she has been operating from an FBI safe house on a payroll over the past 7 years, making over $500,000. Now, for a career in journalism, that is a huge number. And that's in addition to this sort of statement, which is a big statement, which many people have disregarded. CCTV footage shows that Mahsa Amini she suffered a heart attack with absolutely no provocation. What it shows is that the Iranian police approaches her. Perhaps a controversy was going on, a simple back and forth, and then she falls, suffering a heart attack with no physical provocation, at least. And even Masih Alinejad, who I've mentioned in the article, had in her personal tweets on her page on Twitter, she made no mention of any physical violence in the first few tweets about Mahsa Amini. But it seems that as the story progressed, all of the sudden, she accuses the Iranian police of waging some sort of violence against her. So this discrepancy in the narrative was very brazen, and I mentioned it in tweets in the article. And in addition to that, with that sequence of events, the first news outlets that were to come forward and to accuse Iranian police of killing Mahsa Amini were actually US-funded outlets in Farsi, such as Iran Wire.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, what's the significance, in your opinion, of Iran to Palestinian resistance factions?
Well, I mean, people must know this, mustn't they? That the Iranians are stalwart supporters of the resistance in Palestine. The term which is used for the unity that there is between various different factions through the whole region is the term the axis of resistance, encompassing the Syrians, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Sarala in Yemen. And the Iranians are supporting all of that. And if it wasn't for Iran, in terms of supplying weaponry and funding and training, then the possibility of the liberation of Palestine wouldn't even exist.
Sure. I mean, Mona, your article referred to the evolution of the story and the role of certain news outlets like Iran Wire. How are they related to the US?
Well, some of the first news outlets that came to mention or accuse the Iranian police of violence are, for example, Iran Wire and some other, they have their lackeys on social media, because without a base, how will they be able to propagate such a false narrative? So what I looked into and what I found interesting was Iran Wire in particular, because it was founded by Iranian exile. Is there something wrong with the connection?
No, we can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. It was founded by Iranian exile Mazyar Bahari, and what I found is that Mazyar Bahari openly admitted to supporting not only illegal demonstrations in Iran, but also color revolutions, and hence why now he is a Western asset, and he is behind the propagation of such narratives. And many of his likes are doing the same thing. For example, there was one mention of of a military writer who works with the Pentagon, and his works are repeatedly cited in papers published by the U.S. military. And these people, they were Iranians, and now they're working for Washington. So you could say that people like Masih Alinejad, people like Maziar Bahari, they withhold that sort of system in Washington that looks to create instability in West Asia. And right now, today, as David mentioned, Iran is a staunch supporter of resistance factions in this area. So to destabilize Iran would be a blow to Palestinian resistance.
Sure. Well, let's just pause there for a moment, if we can, because we've got a report now about the role of the US and Israel, in that matter, in the protests.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe. Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
That was former US President Barack Obama uttering words that, though not specifically about Iran, seems eerily close to describing the West playbook when it comes to fomenting dissent in places like the Islamic Republic. Not coincidentally, the self-proclaimed leader of the protests also lives in the US, in an FBI safe house in New York. But who is Masih Alinejad? On Twitter, she has more than 500,000 followers and more than 8 million on Instagram. But she describes herself on her profiles only as an Iranian journalist and activist, or as a journalist. In reality, Alinejad works directly for a US government propaganda operation called Voice of America. At VOA, she's presented a program for the last 7 years on the VOA's Persian service, and according to public records, has received over $500,000 in government contracts since 2015. In addition to these roles, Alinejad is the founder of 2 campaigns, White Wednesdays, which encourages the wearing of white headscarves, and My Stealthy Freedom. Both claim to be focused on the hijab and women's rights in Iran. But Alinejad is not centrally concerned with reform in Iran, but with increasing sanctions and promoting regime change. She is called for death to the dictator. When she appeared on CNN recently, her remarks were not about the hijab, but about pressuring the US not to make a nuclear deal with Iran and instead increase sanctions.
Stop negotiating with our murderers. Cut off all your ties with the Islamic Republic.
Evidence from inside Iran suggests that, through her and others, the Obama playbook is guiding the protest. For example, listen to the testimony from a protester arrested for petrol bombing an ambulance.
مسیح علینژاد گفتن اینقدر توی اینترنت و اینورا گفته بودن منم گفتم که حتما میبرم منم یه دونه فرد.
Alinejad's views suggest an alignment with extremist Zionist positions. Add to that her links with key Zionist lobby groups in the US. In June this year, she received the so-called Moral Courage Award from the extremist American Jewish Committee, a group with a long record of collaboration with Israeli intelligence. Alinejad was also booked to speak at the conference of United Against Nuclear Iran in September this year. UANI is a hardline US-based group which has a former director of Mossad on its advisory board. Masih Alinejad is one of many vehicles for the US and Israel to undermine the Islamic Republic of Iran, not least because of its steadfast support of the Palestinian Liberation Movement and the axis of resistance more widely.
Mona, can you tell us what you know about Masih Alinejad's connection to the US?
Yes. So governmental data openly reports that since 2014, when she moved to the US, till today, Alinejad has earned about $628,000 from the U.S. Agency for Global Media. The U.S. Agency for Global Media is the most significant regime-changing arm for the U.S. empire, and it's directly funded by the U.S. Congress. Right now, as we are speaking, she's protected by the FBI. Why would she be protected by the FBI if she's doing some form of clean-cut journalism? She's doing a lot more than that. Much of her work on social media is not only a regime change, but it's also sort of whitewashing the images of war criminals. She has images with people like Madeleine Albright and Mike Pompeo, who, to be honest, for the wars that they have waged and for the aggression they have upheld, they should be tried in The Hague, you know? So she is very, very close to Washington, and she is doing their dirty work.
Yeah. I mean, David, what support has Alinejad had from Israel lobby groups?
Oh, well, she's well in with the Zionist movement, especially in the US. I mean, she's had support from AIPAC, the biggest Israel lobby group. She's had support from the American Jewish Committee, which we saw there in the film, a long-standing Zionist organization, which used to be non-Zionist until about 1945 and then became very Zionist, set up Commentary magazine, the leading neoconservative journal throughout the whole post-war period. So there's that. And of course, there's the United Against Nuclear Iran connection. But there are also the group Stand With Us, which of course is used by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in occupied Palestine as a force multiplier. And that's the words of an Israeli minister talking about that. So she's very closely in with it. And she's also expressed her desire to normalize relationships with Israel, to visit Israel, that there shouldn't be a boycott of Israel. So she's very much using the kind of Israeli playbook.
I mean, given what David has said just there, Mona, I mean, Masih Alinejad has been very favourable, hasn't she, towards the Zionist regime in her public comments. I mean, do you think Israel's role's important here?
Even if no evidence conjures on the internet, it is very much likely that the CIA coordinated with the Mossad. And we have to note here that Israel is the United States' most staunch ally in this region, and its role in West Asia is to create chaos. It lives off of it and it functions off of it. So even if, which is impossible, even if the Mossad had absolutely no role in what's happening in Iran today, it is benefiting off of it. And here we could look back at a speech by former Prime Minister Netanyahu before Bush's so-called war on terror, where he mentions that part of the strategic destabilization of West Asia is to destabilize Iran, which today Iran, which is one of the most stable and one of the most sovereign countries in our area, supporting resistance factions. In order to destabilize such an open society to Netanyahu, they would have to create some sort of identity confusion, a soft power. So what he mentioned was, let them watch Hollywood, let them watch films. Today it's Netflix. He suggested Beverly Hills 90210, let the Iranian youth see all that luxury, all those pools, all those mansions, so that they could maintain some sort of cultural superiority. And the fruit of that behavior is it's occurring today. They're bearing it, but not in an organic way. It's been happening over a course of 20 years. So Israel definitely does have a hand in this, and it is benefiting off of the chaos that it's reaping right now.
No, indeed. I mean, and David, I mean, what can you tell me about the Iranian opposition groups, like the supporters of the former Shah and the Mujahideen al-Kaq, or MAK, or MEK organisation that was delisted actually as a terror group by the UK in 2009, I believe. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that the MEK is an armed organisation. It's regarded as a terrorist organisation by the Iranians and by others. It used to be regarded by both the UK and the US as a terrorist organisation. It did this lobbying campaign in 2012. It was delisted in the US. And it's very active still. It has, for example, Facebook last year attempted to close down a troll farm it operates in Albania, which seems to have been unsuccessful. It continues to be active in the contemporary period, and it's also been active in demonstrations around the world. And in London, for example, there were MEK people in Trafalgar Square involved in an attack on a mosque where many Iranian exiles worship in London. And so there's been a very strong role there for the MEK. But in alliance with the MEK have been monarchist supporters of the old Shah. And you can see this when you look at the demos. You look for the flag, and the flag that they have is like the Iranian flag, but it has a lion and a moon on it, and that's the monarchist flag. And these are people who support the Shah. And in fact, I mean, the symbols on that flag are actually, I mean, extraordinarily enough, actually Aryan symbols.
Good Lord.
And there's an actual right-wing ideology underlying all this, which sees Iranians as being superior ethnically and racially to Arabs. So there's an extraordinary set of politics in there.
Yeah. Just finally then David, and briefly, because we are running short of time, is it really true that the group known as United Against Nuclear Iran is actually an asset of the Zionist entity? I
would go further than saying it was an asset. I mean, this is a very extreme pro-Zionist organisation which is used to pressure the US government to do what the Israeli government wants. I mean, not just that they had Meir Dagan, the former chief of Mossad, on its advisory board, but it's absolutely stuffed with card-carrying neocons and pro-Zionists. And its function really is to pressure the US to make sure that the US doesn't ever do anything rational and does things that the Israelis want, which is to, effectively to isolate and intimidate and subvert the government of Iran.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Let me thank Mona Issa for joining us from Lebanon, obviously David, our resident expert. Thanks for joining us, watching today. Remember, please to follow the show on social media. We'll be back next week with more news and analysis on Palestine Declassified. So until next time, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now.